The fork clattered onto the table, cutting through the tension in the room as his words dropped like bombshells. "You'll sign the house over, won't you?" Laughter rippled around me, a scripted applause for my presumed compliance. Above, the chandelier shimmered eerily, its glow catching the edge of my wine glass, which trembled near my elbow. With all eyes on me, I set it down deliberately and declared, "No." The room sucked in a breath, as if the air had thickened with my defiance. Whispers flitted about like startled birds, barely audible yet sharply intrusive. My name fell from someone's lips like an unsought warning. My mother tugged away, her pearls clinking nervously, while my father's jaw twitched, caught somewhere between disbelief and annoyance. Seconds ticked by, stretching into a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Just then, he fired back, "So will sue." Ah, sibling love, wrapped in a bow of betrayal. Flashback to simpler times, like when I was 8 and the sound of breaking glass echoed only for me. Randy would hurl the door, or a picture frame would tumble down, and I'd swoop in to gather the remnants of his chaos. The clean-up crew he'd jest, and I'd beam with joy simply to keep his laughter alive. A peculiar rhythm formed, his noise contrasted with my silence, and it felt like our normal. But was it normal to feel like a ghost in your own family? Fast forward to my teenage years, Randy crashed my bike into a mailbox, and of course, Dad replaced his that very day. Mine. It rusted away, bent and forgotten on the curb, no real surprise there. I told myself it didn't sting, but deep down, it always did. By 16, I took matters into my own hands. I tackled the leaky kitchen sink and the cabinet door in desperate need of alignment. Mom would saunter past, coffee in hand, teasing, "You should have been born a boy, you'd be useful." And there was Randy, ever the audience, tapping his cereal bowl in mock applause. College came, and while Randy stumbled through semesters, floundering his way to a brand new car, I was out early, sporting a toolbox instead of a fancy diploma. "That suits you better," Dad chuckled about my practical skills. At 25, I decided to give up on the chase for fairness. Only Grandma ever truly saw me. She likened me to a stubborn flower pushing through the hardest concrete. "You grow quietly," she'd say. I finally grasped those words when I inherited her journals, while Randy snagged a trust fund. Determined to beat the odds, I dove headfirst into restoration as I discovered that neglected 1920s craftsman home, a treasure crumbling in despair. It was ultimately my canvas of repair, and I became an artist of resilience. Every weekend turned into sweat and grit spent patching walls and restoring shattered corners. When my parents cast their indifferent gazes on my work, claiming I'd burn myself out on that dump, I simply handed them mugs I'd crafted myself. The snickers faded as they drove off into the distance, leaving me alone with my stubbornly standing home. One particularly chilly winter evening, sitting on that floor with my hands raw from labor, I realized I'd erected a fortress from their doubting words. The wind howled through the crevices, bringing a whiff of pine that whispered of hope. My palm lay against the sturdy railing I'd just restored, warm and solid beneath my fingers, a tangible reminder that, despite everything, I was not only surviving but flourishing in this fortress I had made my own. Outside, a dog barked, breaking the eerie silence inside my home. That was the night when I decided I was done waiting for anyone to acknowledge me. It started with a humdrum Wednesday, just before noon. As I sanded the window frame, those sunbeams danced like thin, dusty ribbons across the floor. My phone buzzed incessantly, and then his voice cut through the static like a bad knife. "Randy needs that house more than you do." My heart sank at the word caught, it struck me like a nail on glass. I clasped my paint-covered wrist and held my breath, refusing to respond. Mistaking my silence for fear, he hung up, likely pleased with himself. Seconds later, my mom chimed in, her tone a sharpened knife. "You know what you owe us, Luna. Don't make this ugly." Just like that, the line went dead. An uneasy weight settled over the room, while outside, the wind rattled the glass panes like a bad band. I set down the phone beside my coffee mug, staring into my reflection trembling in the cup. This wasn't the first time I faced this uncertainty, it felt like déjà vu in legalese. Their message was as clear as day, my efforts belonged to them. The sunlight shifted, and I picked up my chisel, pressing it against the wood, the sound a satisfying scrape against the stillness. Each fragment flew off like confetti, and when silence fell again, I marveled at the marks I'd made. I'd spent years crafting this house with my bare hands, the one thing they couldn't take away from me. Yet, it seemed they wanted even that. With sawdust on my palms, I grabbed the keys by the door. The metal was cold, biting into my skin. I felt steadier than before. In that moment, I stopped being just their daughter, no more. I was their opponent now. Julia's office was a museum of paper and stale coffee, sharp and sterile. I found myself across from her, palms resting on my evidence folder, a 5-year testament of self-sufficiency. She flipped through the papers in silence and then burst into laughter. "They're suing you for a property you own outright," she exclaimed, her voice a delightful melody breaking the tension I hadn't known I was holding. I exhaled deeply. No one had laughed alongside me in a long, long time. Julia leaned in closer, her demeanor suddenly tactical. "Let them throw the first punch," she said. "Then we'll assemble your case piece by piece." Determination settled between us, and I nodded, opening my folder filled with receipts, bank transfers, and photos documenting every single crack I'd smoothed over with effort. "Keep it all organized, both digital and printed," she advised with a calm authority. Each instruction wasn't just strategic, it was a brand new lifeline for me. That night, under the glow of my dim kitchen lights, I dove into the quiet work. Folders labeled mortgage, relunations, and more began to line my digital desktop, while printed copies were nestled in brown envelopes across my dining table, almost like trophies of survival. I even replayed my father's threatening call, saving it under threat recordings, each click firing me up a little more. Every label, every organized folder steadied me against the chaos that threatened to sweep in like an uninvited guest. This wasn't just about some house, it was a fight for my individuality, for the identity they were trying to smother. With each task completed, I felt a delightful tingle of power rushing through me. Was this what it felt like to reclaim yourself? If so, I was more than ready to embrace it. At 2 a.m., I found myself surrounded by a chaotic sea of paper in the living room, with only the old radiator's gentle hum breaking the silence. Rain danced on the window, creating a perfect backdrop for my late-night self-reflection. I was cataloging not just documents but my entire life story, the very house some called a waste, but to me, it held the echoes of yesterday. The radiator hissed, cutting through the quiet like a deflating tire, reminding me of those little victories. Just a week later, the phone rang and it was Julia, as steady as ever. "They filed," she announced, sans emotion. My own voice remained calm, maybe too calm. "Good. Now we file back." We met 2 days later, the morning sun breaking through the blinds and casting a checkerboard of light and shadow across our cluttered desk. With a flourish, Julia handed me a pen, a metaphorical sword in this legal battle. Counterclaim, fraud, misappropriation, the terms felt sharp, almost cleansing. I signed, feeling like an artist defining the edges of my canvas with every stroke. "Proof of inheritance theft?" Julia inquired, and I slid another folder across the desk, proud as a peacock. Within were Grandma's trust statements, showcasing funds that vanished faster than my motivation for the gym the week after New Year's. Julia scanned her inheritance clues, then looked back at me with that satisfaction, professional, but so telling. "They left a trail," she grinned. I nodded, fully aware, they always do. The moment felt tremendous, like laying the first brick for a fortress. Returning home, I drifted through the house like it was a museum. Each familiar surface welcomed my touch, the knob I polished, the stair rail I sanded, each memory layered in varnish. In the kitchen, I flicked off all the lights except for one flickering bulb that eerily reminded me of an old reality show set. My laptop illuminated the room with its cool, pale blue glow as I navigated through the final files, statements, deeds, records. Each click resonated, almost like breathing, anchoring me in this whirlwind of familial chaos. Messages began popping up on my phone from family members, each one dripping with concern. "You're making this worse," they said, as if I were baking a soufflé gone rogue. But I didn't reply. All that drama got relegated to a folder aptly titled Noise. As the days swiftly turned into weeks, I became a diligent warrior. By day, I gathered evidence. By night, I built my fortress of defense. Julia was the strategist handling our legal maneuvers while I turned into an evidence connoisseur, reveling in the meticulous order of it all. When the notice of discovery came in, I sat at my kitchen table, now a headquarters of sorts, an expensive theater for the drama unfolding. My laptop glowed next to perfectly organized, color-coded binders, as bright as my ambition. I admired my surroundings. It was the most beautiful structure I had ever crafted. Reflected in the window, I could hardly recognize myself. Shoulders back, hands steady, gone were the days of flinching or backing down. I wore my power silently, like a tailor-made suit. It was subtle yet formidable. One evening, Julia dialed, a slight tremor of excitement in her voice. "They're panicking, trying to settle." I leaned back, a smirk creeping onto my lips. "Not yet." When she pressed, asking why, I explained that they believed their guilt could silence me. Classic intimidation tactics, really. Julia's silence was reassuring, a moment of unity in this chaos. "Let them talk," she finally said, and her confidence washed over me like a warm hug. The night before the big family dinner, I strolled through my home one last time, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet like an old friend. Pausing at the repaired window, I watched the city lights dance outside, each flicker a reminder of what was at stake. The familiar creaks and groans filled the air, as if the house itself was celebrating my resilience. As I stood there, I knew that tomorrow would be a showdown, and I was more than ready. Reclaims were much more fun than renouncing your pass. In the reflection of that quiet room, I finally saw the woman I was meant to be. My keys jingled in my hand, a reminder that I hadn't just locked doors, I had learned to firmly close them. As dawn broke with its blush of pale grey light, I packed documents into my bag, every paper meticulously labelled and sealed like a Michelin star dinner. Today was the start of something, not just an ending. With a final cup of black coffee in hand, the spoon had a little clink before silence enveloped me. Unlike before, this quiet wasn't empty, it was purposeful. The dining room smelled like lemon polish and the whole affair exuded an air of staged comfort, except for the one lonely chair at the end, reserved just for me. Crystal glasses danced in the soft light, creating an illusion of tranquility that I was ready to shatter. Julia walked in on my arm, followed closely by Carlos, whose briefcase clicked shut like the final punctuation of a tense novella. My mother's mascara was already fighting a losing battle against the red around her eyes, and as she saw me, her rehearsed sorrow fell flat. "You came," she said, her voice wavering. I cut through the sentimentality with a steady tone, reminding them all that I was not here for theatrics. "I'm here for closure," I stated. My father cleared his throat like he was trying to hammer down authority, but really he sounded more like a man in a courtroom. "Then let's discuss what you owe the family." Julia, calm as a cucumber, smoothed the tablecloth with her hand and plopped a folder in front of him with all the grace of a legal assassin. The crinkle of paper echoed in the stunned silence like a thunderclap, and I could see the tension imprinted on his face as he began to read. As he took in line after line, you could almost watch his command dissipate into thin air. "These are," he began, but Julia interjected, "crisp and clear, financial records, along with proof of misappropriated funds." The atmosphere shifted, shock hung suspended. My mother almost spilled her wine, gripping the glass like it was a life raft in turbulent seas. Randy, however, bristled like an angry cat, declaring everything ridiculous, but I had no sympathy left. While Randy protested, my words landed more like a gentle nudge than an accusation. "You spent my trust fund," I reminded him, and helped them try to take my house. That's not twisting, that's math. The pitiful laughter escaping from him was shaky and tinged with fear. Carlos slid an envelope across the table, fuller than a holiday feast with proof of bank transfers. It was hard evidence served hot, and the domino effect began. The chaos erupted in a flurry of voices, accusations flying like confetti, chairs scraping the floor in a nervous dance of hostility. Amidst it all, Julia remained unperturbed, tapping her pen against the folder like a maestro guiding an orchestra. In the eye of the storm, she calmly stated, "You have 48 hours to drop the lawsuit, return the funds with interest, and fix your taxes. After that, we're taking this federal." The room quieted to a buzz, my father's face now a ripe tomato. I stood, the chair screeching a farewell as I pushed back. "I came to give you a chance," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Not forgiveness." Just when the dust began to settle, Grace's voice rang out, trembling in disbelief, "Randy, is this true?" The lack of a response from him spoke louder than a marching band in a library. As if under a spell, she stood, slipped off her ring, and placed it on the table, sealing whatever chaos was about to follow. The sound of the lock clicking was thunderous, overshadowing any uproar my family might have conjured. My mother's tears cascaded like a Broadway performance, full of drama and flair. Meanwhile, my father was fixated on the documents, eyes wide as if they might spontaneously combust. Julia meticulously stacked the folders like she was creating a masterpiece of legal art. Carlos wrapped up his case with a finality that felt like a closing curtain. As I made my way to the exit, I quietly reminded myself, this isn't revenge, but accountability. Just outside, the crisp evening air wrapped around me like a refreshing hug, a stark contrast to the warmth flickering inside our house where love had long been mistaken for control. Julia joined me, her presence reassuring. "You did what needed to be done," she said. I nodded, realizing this was not just about justice, it was also about liberation. Each crunch of gravel beneath my feet felt like the definitive punctuation of a long overdue chapter ending. Inside, I heard my father's muffled call echo through the walls, yet I didn't flinch or look back, a small victory of my own. 6 months drifted by, and the house transformed into a sanctuary of tranquility. No more phone calls or urgent legalese cluttering the air. Just me, soaking up the drip of rain and the earthy scent of a garden reclaimed. Those mornings on the porch with a coffee in hand felt like a victory parade. I admired the floorboards I'd sanded, every scratch and mark telling a story no one could erase. The stack of bills still arrived but bore my name with an independence I had long craved. One day, Julia popped by in a cozy cardigan, far removed from her usual lawyer garb, handing me a final envelope. "All settled," she said simply, and the relief washed over me even before I opened it. With the rain drumming softly around us, I held the untouched envelope close, savoring the knowledge that everything was finished. I wandered barefoot through the damp garden, inhaling the fresh air that felt like a new beginning. Grandma always said roots break through concrete to seek the sun, and maybe she had foreseen this transformation well before I could. The house stood glowing faintly, a beacon of warmth, an emblem of safety amidst the grey skies. My fingers glided along the smooth stair rail, a testament to resilience after countless bouts with splinters and heartbreak. A golden ray broke through the clouds, casting light on an old keyring that shimmered like a trophy. It no longer felt burdensome in my hand, rather, it transformed into proof of survival, echoing a silent victory. The sounds of the rain against the glass reminded me that justice doesn't scream, it quietly lingers, a gentle reminder that peace was finally at hand. Inside the walls of my home, I felt the weight of their threats dissolve into the past, serving only as whispers against the memory of strength I gained. The house, now standing as a testament to resilience, held every nail and scar like badges of honor. You don't have to shout to reclaim what's yours, sometimes, just closing the door is enough. If you found yourself resonating with this journey, hit subscribe and join me for more tales of quiet triumphs and soft revelations.